Hey guys, Michael here. How's it going? Today we are going to dive into the very exciting topic of industry and external analysis. We're going to get very deep into the ideas of the management guru Michael Porter. So sit back, enjoy the ride, take notes, let me know if you have any questions. So let's get right into it then. All right, so trying to set the stage here. So we said that in order to have above average profits, what we're calling a sustainable competitive advantage, that a firm needs to have some way of shielding its revenue stream. All right, money is coming in, money is going out. Make this as simple as possible. In order to have a sustainable competitive advantage, the revenue has to exceed the costs. So how can we do that? A couple of ways. We can have a barrier to entry that protects us from competition, or we can have some sort of unique, sustainable, unique core competence, valuable, unique resources. Has to be one of those other. Remember, this is Michael's rules of sustainable competitive advantage. So one school of thought in strategic management puts emphasis on the environment as a source of that advantage. This is what we call the IO perspective, and IO stands for industrial organization. That's right. So the industrial organization school, coming from economics, says that it's the environment that possibly leads to sustainable competitive advantage. So how do we analyze that environment? Let's have a look. Well, we have to know what's going on in the environment, right? This involves scanning, monitoring, forecasting, and assessing, keeping an eye on what's out there. Remember, the emphasis is on the external environment. When we're talking about the external environment, we're going to break it up into 3 levels. We're going to talk about the general environment. The general environment is everything out there in the entire universe. The industry environment is a little bit more specific. This is what's happening in our own industry, so this is more critical to us. And then finally, most critical of all is what's happening in our competitor environment, what our immediate competitors are doing. Okay? Another way of thinking about that, general environment is way out there, so it's really focused on the future. It's affecting everybody, not just us. The industry environment is more immediate, and then the competitive environment is today. What are they doing today? What do we got to do today? It's as immediate as you can get. So analysis of the general environment and an analysis of the industrial environment and an analysis of the competitor environment. This comes up with the external environment, and from the industrial organizational perspective, which puts emphasis on the environment, this is how we make our decisions. So we look for opportunities and threats. So for example, we could use Palapod as our example. Tia, when she graduated from App State in 2008, she did an analysis on the environment, and she said, what's happening right now? Well, there's this move towards more virtual. Entrepreneurship is kind of becoming hot. IPOs and startups are continuously hot. So after analyzing the situation, she moved to New York and started her company, Palapod. The external environment, we can break this up into 7 different I guess you could call these attributes of the external environment. You've got the economic environment. You've got the demographic environment. You've got the political legal environment. You've got the technological component of the environment. You've got the global component of the environment. You've got the socio-cultural component of the environment. You've got the physical component of the environment. All of these components affect the industry environment. We're going to spend most of our time today on the industry environment, which this is a tool that comes from Michael Porter, says that you've got these 5 threats. You might have heard of the 5 forces model. So this threat of new entrants, threat of suppliers, threat of buyers, threat of substitutes, and then of course rivalry. And then you have the competitor environment. These are the people or the companies that are in your same strategic group, is how we're going to say it. And if they're in your own strategic group, you've got to pay specific attention to them. Let's look at this general environment segments. That's what they're calling it. Segments and elements. This is table 2 from your textbook, 2.1. So the demographic environment consists of things like the population size, the age structure, the geographic distribution, the ethnic mix, the income distribution. For example, in the United States right now, we have a situation in which we have an aging population. As the baby boom cohort reaches retirement age, this is something that's happening in the demographic environment. It's something that we need to consider. Economic segment. This consists of inflation, interest, trade deficits, budget deficits and surplus, personal savings rates, business savings rates, gross domestic product. Well, right now in the United States, as we speak, as I am filming this particular lesson, as I am recording this lesson, we're in a very odd economic situation. GDP has actually decreased quite considerably. Inflation rates, they claim, are quite low. Interest rates are very low, near zero. We have a humongous budget deficit. The national debt is moving towards $27 trillion. Personal savings rates are actually pretty low right now because people are having to dip into their savings as a result of many people losing their jobs. Business savings rates are actually pretty good. And then gross domestic product is down. Oddly enough, though, in the face of all of this, the stock market is up. Political legal environment, antitrust laws. There's talk about breaking up Google and Facebook. Taxation laws, those are constantly in the news. Trump administration wants to lower the tax on capital gains. And deregulation philosophies, labor training laws, education philosophies, policies, all of these things are part of the political legal environment. Socio-cultural environment, women in the workforce diversity. Diversity is a very big push across many universities. We have a push for diversity at App State right now. It's also happening across the workplace. We're thinking of trying to figure out better ways of having more diversity and inclusion in our society. Attitudes about the quality of work life, shifts in career preferences, shifts in preferences regarding product and service characteristics. Technological segment. Well, right now, lots of things are moving virtual. As a result of the pandemic, where all of us are being forced to do things differently, and technology is a big part of that. We have e-commerce taking over bricks and mortar. We've got online education taking over face-to-face education. So lots of things happening in that segment. Global segment. Boy, this is a big one. This is where a lot of my research takes place. Right now, it looks like we're seeing what's going to be called the big decoupling between the United States and China. This is a huge, huge factor. For the past 20 years, there's been more integration, but it looks as though globalization is slowing down, and now we may be seeing some deglobalization, is what they say. And then finally, the sustainable physical environment. This is a new one. When I first started teaching this particular course, they didn't have this segment included, but that's something that, we now realize that the physical environment is not infinite, and we need to take care of it, and so that's something that's receiving more attention. Okay. So we're going to spend most of our time about the environment talking about industry. This is something you need to know very well. This industry analysis, a lot of this comes from Michael Porter. A little bit of the background of Michael Porter. Michael Porter has 2 PhDs, both from Harvard. The first one was in economics. He was trained as an industrial organization economist, an IO economist, and he took all of that knowledge from economics and he said, you know what, I think we can use this information to help managers. And so he developed these tools, the 5 forces analysis, the industry analysis. And so this has become kind of a bedrock of strategic management for undergraduates. So you need to know this inside and out and very well. Basically, industry, group of companies producing the same product. The different forces or factors of the industry are threat of new entrants, the power of suppliers, power of buyers, the threat of product substitutes, intensity of rivalry among competitors. This is the original diagram of Michael Porter. This is how he originally set it up in 1980 when he first developed this model. And Michael Porter came along and he really gave us a better, more refined way of looking at the environment and about competition, and about the problems that managers face at a strategic level. Because before Michael Porter came along, most people, when they would talk about how tough business is, they would say, hey, it's tough out there, the competition is tough. And it was a collection of stories. It wasn't that systematic way of looking at it. And so you'd have courses, strategic management courses would often be taught by executives. And that's good, in some ways, because they tell their stories. But there was no real systematic way of thinking or looking at competition and the threats that managers face. And so the main focus was on this one, rivalry. And people would say, wow, it's really tough out there. Competition is tough. And this competition pushes down the profitability, and I have to look out for that. But Michael Porter came along and he says, it's much more complicated than that, because if we look at an industry, we'll notice that we have 5 different forces, 5 different sources of pressure on the profitability. Yes, you do have industry rivalry. You've got to look out for your competitors, but for every industry, there's also a threat of new entrants. Some industries it's very easy to enter. Some industries it's quite difficult to enter. And if it's easy to enter an industry, that's not good, because that means as soon as your industry starts doing well, competition's going to come in. If it's easy to come in and they see profits, they come in, right? Also, we have to buy stuff to make our product. We have to buy supplies, the bargaining power of suppliers. If our suppliers have a lot of bargaining power, if there's a labor group, if there's some sort of rare resource, if they're in real estate, in retail, it used to be location, and it still is location, but the virtual economy is kind of changing that somewhat. If these suppliers have a lot of bargaining power, they're going to use that. Who can blame them, right? And they're going to bring away some of the profitability. They're going to be trying to grab some of the profit. Over here, you've got your buyers, your customers. Those pesky customers. Yeah, those customers are going to be looking for what? Lower prices and higher quality. Again, who can blame them? I've never heard anyone say, hey, I'm going shopping and I'm going to look for the highest prices and the lowest quality I can find. No, nobody does that, right? As consumers, we all want the best deals. We want the best prices. We want the highest quality. And we're going to bargain for that. We're going to shop around until we get the best quality and the prices that we're satisfied with. And if we come up with somebody and we say that, hey, you know what, I can get it across the street at a better price, we're going to do that. So customers are going to do that. If they have a lot of bargaining power, they're going to use that. And Finally, we have substitute products. Yeah, as if it wasn't bad enough, we've got substitute products. There are some things that are not in our industry that are doing the same thing as our industry's product. If those substitute products are a substantial threat, well, they're going to exert pressure on the profitability of the industry. So, yeah, you put these things together and it's a more comprehensive picture of what an industry is about. And notice that this is not going to be the same from industry to industry to industry. For example, if you're thinking about starting a beauty salon, then this is going to be different than if you think about starting, say, a auto repair shop. I just grabbed two out that we could relate to. So let's look at these one at a time and find out what makes them stronger or weaker. First one we're going to look at is the threat of new entrants. Remember we said that every industry has the threat of new entrants, or we sometimes call this barriers to entry. And these barriers to entry or threat of new entrants vary from industry to industry. Some industries it's easy to enter, some industries it's more difficult to enter. What are some of the factors that make an industry easier or more difficult to enter? The first one is economies of scale. What's economies of scale? Remember back from your econ course, your principles of econ course. Yeah, you're right. Economies of scale is simply this idea. Scale means size. That as you scale the scale of your operation gets larger, you get more efficient. Okay? So as you get larger, technically we say your long-run average costs decrease as you get larger. And then as that happens, you get more efficient. You're able to charge lower profits and still make a profit. And at some point, that creates a barrier for other companies that want to enter this industry. Make sense? Yeah, and notice that this is not the same for all industries. In some industries, economies of scale are going to be a big factor. In some industries, economies of scale are going to be, not such a big deal. What kind of industries would be very susceptible to the impact of economies of scale? Manufacturing. Manufacturing industries tend to really be able to use economies of scale because they substitute more sophisticated technologies for production. And as they do that, they get larger, bigger machines, bigger factories. As they do that, it becomes more efficient. They use less labor, right? Service industries, not so much. Think about it. You rarely see barber shops where you've got 1 million barber chairs. It wouldn't make sense. For one thing, they have to be kind of spread out where, they're closer to customers. And then for another, you got to have one barber or one beautician per customer for, depending on how fast they work, if they're going to do a good job, hopefully they won't do it too fast. 20 minutes for me, mine's pretty simple. For if you're wanting something a bit more complicated hairstyle, maybe a little bit longer. But really, there's not many economies of scale in service industries. Another factor is product differentiation. If the product is the same, there's not much differentiation in this industry's products, then it makes it easy for anybody to come in and enter. But as the product differentiation increases, what does this mean? Well, it means that customers start getting preferences. If there are differences, I like this one better than that one, and this company does it this way, and they do it the way I like it. And so another company comes in, they don't quite do it the way I like it, so that creates a threat of entry. Capital requirements. Some industries, it just takes a lot of money to set it up, regardless of scale, just to start off in the first place. Switching costs. What are switching costs? Switching costs are, in this instance, we're talking about the cost of switching from one product to another on the customer side. Yeah, we don't think about it. But if we switch from one product to another product, there's a slight cost involved. Economists include such things as surge costs. We've got to search things out. We have to experiment. When we try another product, we might not like it, and so that's costly. We may not use it, or we have a decreased satisfaction. So these costs of switching products, if they're very high, that creates a barrier to entry. If the switching costs are very low, then it's not a barrier to entry. Switching costs are really high for certain things like software. Yeah, software. Whenever you switch your operating system or you switch your iOS, some people like Apple, some people like Android, right? Some people like the iOS, some people like Windows. And if you switch back and forth, that can be quite costly. Say switching something like your brands of bottled water is very cheap. I mean, you go in and you see Aquafina, you see Bonaqua in the Circle K, you can choose this one, you can choose that one. Really, the costs are very low, so switching costs, something like that, are minuscule. It doesn't create a barrier to entry. See what I mean? Next one's access to distribution channels. For a long time, Walmart, they had access to they kind of had a monopoly on distribution channels, and so that created a barrier to entry to other retailers. There might be some cost disadvantages other than economies of scale. You might have two farmers side by side. One of them has a great piece of land that's very fertile. Another one has a piece of land that's rocky and barren. Well, the farmer with the worse land is going to have a higher cost, regardless if they're the same size, right? So there might be some cost disadvantages that are not economies of scale. Next one is government policy. This is what we normally think of. A lot of monopolies or barriers to entry are established by governments. Government gives someone an exclusive right to produce a product, and that creates a barrier to entry. That's often the case in the case of public utilities, and lots of industries are regulated. If I can go back to the hair cutting industry, the beautician industry, you have to have a license and so forth. Not just anybody can set up and start cutting hair. This is government established barriers to entry. And the last one is expected retaliation. You may be reluctant to go into an industry because you know that if you do go into this industry, that you're going to get clobbered, and so that might be a barrier to entry. Okay, let's speed this up a little bit. Bargaining power of suppliers. Suppliers are likely to be powerful if there are just a few firms. Makes sense, right? If the supplier's products have few substitutes, they're going to have more bargaining power. If the buyer is not an important customer to the supplier, don't have to take them that seriously. If the supplier's product is an important input into the buyer's product, then have to take it very seriously. If the supplier's products are differentiated, then that means that some are better than others and they have bargaining power. If there's no differentiation, think about this. If there's no differentiation, then the only thing to compete on is price, right? If the supplier's products have high switching costs, we talked about switching costs last time. If I'm buying from a particular supplier for my business and my switching costs are higher, then the supplier obviously has more bargaining power. If the supplier poses a credible threat of forward integration. What's forward integration? Forward integration means that one company buys another one, moving downstream in the production process. So it's like, okay, I don't like the price that you're offering. I'm going to buy your whole company. If my supplier can threaten me that way credibly, then they have a lot of bargaining. Next one is the bargaining power of buyers. Those pesky customers looking for lower prices and higher quality. How dare them? I'm being facetious, guys, in case you can't tell. Ooh, I'm in the way over here. Come on over here, Mike. All right. Buyers are more likely to be powerful if they're concentrated. You might have done this with your friends before. Hey, if we go in together, we might be able to get a better price, right? Cooperatives, buyers' cooperatives are just concentrating buyers so that they have more bargaining power. Next one, if the purchase accounts for a significant fraction of the supplier's sales, they have more bargaining power. If the products are undifferentiated, if I'm a buyer and I'm buying something and they have one, they're all the same. All right, which one is cheaper? Once you introduce some differentiation, then it becomes more complicated, right? They have one. Oh, the style of this one is better, but this one is more efficient, and this one is, something else. Some other different feature. Well, then they're competing on something other than price. They've reduced my bargaining power as a buyer. If the buyers face few switching costs, same thing, but just on the other side of the transaction. If the buyer presents a credible threat of backward integration, same thing that we talked about last time with suppliers, right? Buyer is pointing to the supplier, says, I don't like the price. I'm going to buy your whole company if you don't give me a better price. If they can say that credibly, that increases their bargaining power. If the product is unimportant to quality, this is another one, right? And then finally, if the buyer has full information. The internet has increased bargaining power across the board. If you go into a bargaining situation knowing what your options are, knowing what the costs of your seller are, then you have a lot more bargaining power than if you go in sort of bargaining blind. The next one, the threat of substitute products. Again, substitute products are products in another industry that do the same thing as our product in our industry. Examples, materials. When you go shopping, what do they always ask you when you're checking it out? Paper or plastic? Aluminum versus plastic are substitutes. I'm in the way again. I keep getting in the way. Get over here, Mike. Electronic security systems for security guards. The internet has crushed the overnight document delivery service. Nobody does it anymore now that we have electronic signatures. And again, materials and plastics. Basically, the idea is that if these substitutes can do something cheaper or better than the industry's products, then that's a formidable substitute. Finally, last one. This is one we normally think of, the rivalry among competing firms in the industry. Intense rivalry often plays out in the following ways: jockeying for strategic position, using price competition, staging advertising battles, increasing consumer warranties or services, making new product introductions. All of these are things that whenever competition begins to increase, these things start happening, and these things are costly for the companies. So they push down the profitability. Yeah, competition, it's a double-edged sword. For society, competition can often be good because it makes companies work harder, it gives customers better products. But for business people, for burgeoning business people, let's face it, we would rather not have to compete. Because, if our goal is to maximize profits so that we can retire by the time we're 45, so that we can send our sons and daughters to Harvard, so that we can buy that second home in Blowing Rock, we want to make as much money as possible, and so we would rather not have to face that competition. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Economists often look at competition as something that's good. Business people often look at competition as something that they try to get around and avoid, for better or worse. So cutthroat competition is more likely to occur when there are lots of competitors, if there's slow growth, if there are high fixed costs, if there are high storage costs, if there's lack of differentiation or switching costs, if the capacity is added only in large increments, if there are high exit barriers, or if there are high strategic stakes. All of these things make competition, rivalry more intense. For example, why slow growth? I mean, in some ways, whenever you think about industry competition, you think, wow, if the industry's growing fast, then it's dynamic, lots of things are happening, there's more rivalry. No, that's not the case. Actually, when an industry is growing very rapidly, that means the pie is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I can grow, you can grow, everybody can continue to grow as long as the industry's continuing to expand. We don't even have to fight. But if that industry starts to slow down, or heaven forbid starts to shrink, oh my gosh, then the only way I can continue growth to satisfy my shareholders is if I steal market share from you. So slow growth leads to higher rivalry. High fixed costs. If fixed costs are high, even if my profitability goes down, I might stay in business just because I have to cover those fixed costs, right? So I might even be producing at a loss and not go out of business or not even cut production. And so this causes rivalry to be higher. Capacity is added only in large increments. Well, some industries, you have to add your capacity in large blocks. And those large blocks mean that you have to grab, you have to expand more than is maybe even makes sense for you, but you have to do it because it's the only way that your industry operates. Okay? So if you have any questions about any of these, you can always ask me on the discussion forum. Exit barriers. Exit barriers often cause rivalry to be very increased. If there's specialized assets, if there are fixed costs of exit, maybe some labor agreements, if there are strategic interrelationships, if there are emotional barriers or government or social restrictions that keep you from leaving. I talked a little bit earlier about family farms. Family farms are struggling. They've been struggling for as long as I can remember, though, because farming is something that keeps getting more and more efficient. It's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as economies of scale expand. But as that happens, the smaller farms, the family farms, they kind of get pinched, but they don't want to give up because maybe you guys have a farm that was your grandparents' farm that's been in your family maybe for decades or maybe hundreds of years, and so it's kind of sad to give this thing up. Or not just farms, but other businesses. Maybe there are businesses that have been in a family for a long time, and so they hate to give them up. So here it is. We got the whole thing. Let me go back to this one more time now. So this is the whole model. This is this is a model that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. This is Porter's Five Forces. Again, this is a famous model, one of the most, if not the most famous model in all of strategic management. So, until Michael Porter came along, everyone focused on this rivalry among competing firms in the industry, right? And they said that this is what causes the profitability of an industry to be low. Michael Porter came along and said, hey, wait a minute, it's more complicated than that. For every industry, you've got these 5 nasty forces pushing down the profitability. You do have the rivalry, so you got to think about your competitors, and you'll be caught up in competitive battles with your competitors, but they're also potential new competitors. And if it's easy to enter your industry, that's not good, because as soon as you start making money, bada bing, somebody's going to come in and start competing with you. More people will come in. You got these suppliers that are maybe specialized labor or maybe some specialized machinery. If they've got a lot of bargaining power, they're going to compete away the profitability of the industry. Buyers. If the buyers of the industry have a lot of bargaining power, they're going to be competing away the profitability of the industry. And the substitute products. You've got these other industries that our industry is competing with that, that you may not even have considered. So this is kind of a more complete, a more realistic picture of an industry and the 5 forces, and it's useful for managers. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. So, in summary, if we have low barriers to entry, if we have suppliers and buyers that have very strong positions, meaning they have a lot of bargaining power, if we have a lot of threats from substitute products, and if we have a lot of rivalry among competitors, then run away. This is an ugly industry. Low profits, right? So, yeah, that's an unattractive industry. On the other hand, or conversely, we might say that if we have high barriers to entry, if we've got suppliers and buyers that have weak positions, if we've got very few substitute products for our industry, if the rivalry among competitors is only moderate, then what a beautiful industry. Hey, baby. Yeah, looking good. So, right. So that's where you want to be. This is an attractive industry. You remember back in our IO model, one of the things we said, we were trying to find an attractive industry. This is how we would do it. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is take a break. This little video is posted on As You Learn. Go to that and look at that and then come back. Okay, now that you looked at that video, you saw what Michael Porter, that's him, that's the man himself. You can see that he's quite a dynamic character. He's a guy that's responsible for a lot of the areas that we talk about in your undergraduate strategic management course. So why is this important? Well, in 2016, these were the 15 most profitable industries. The industry profitability rate went from 10 to 18%. These are industries that the forces are looking good, baby. These are the ones that we would say are attractive industries. On the other hand, these are the industries that were the least profitable in 2016. Notice that there's a huge difference here. I mean, oil and gas extraction in 2016 was losing money. So these are industries in which we might say those forces were ugly, unattractive. Last thing I want to talk about is this idea of strategic groups and competitor analysis. And strategic groups, and this is a set of firms that are really close to each other in the competitive space. They're doing the same thing. And so in terms of monitoring the external environment, you need to really keep a close eye on your direct competitors. So the intra-strategic group rivalry, that is, the rivalry that takes place within the strategic group, is more intense than the inter-strategic group rivalry, that is, between companies in the same industry but in different strategic groups. Membership in a strategic group defines the characteristics of the firm's strategies because they tend to have similar strategies if they're in the same strategic group. The more similar the strategies are, then the greater is the rivalry within the strategic group, and the strength of the industry's 5 forces differ across different strategic groups. So, as a point, it might make sense sometimes to not do your 5 forces analysis on an entire industry, but rather you might get better results if you do your industry analysis on a strategic group. We'll talk about that more later. Let me give you an example. Here we've got the world automotive industry. Okay, we've got 2 dimensions on this industry. We're talking about, on this horizontal axis, we've got the product line breadth. In other words, the range of products. Here we have price. All right, so starting at the 0 axis, moving out in either direction, moving up this way, the price gets higher. Moving out in this direction, the product line gets broader, more product line breadth. And so within that we have several strategic groups. Up here we've got the exclusive luxury cars, Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche. One German and 2 Italian companies. Down here we've got, you can think about this a little bit different. Maybe Mitsubishi would be down here too, but Hyundai and Kia tend to focus, although they've moved beyond that now. This example maybe is a little bit old. They actually have some pretty decent cars and a pretty broad product line. But let's pretend that it's 2010 for a moment. And in here, you've got, sort of your mid-range luxury companies, Mercedes and BMW. See a few of those in Boone, but not a whole lot. And then over here, you've got the cars that most of us drive. Toyota, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, Honda, Nissan. Actually, Subaru. I think Subaru would probably be over here somewhere. Subaru is something that a lot of people in Boone like to drive because of the all-wheel drive. So, what does this mean? We can think of each one of these as a strategic group. That means that the companies here are competing more fiercely with each other than they are with companies in these other groups, right? Even though we would say they're all in the automobile industry. Right? So what about Tesla? Tesla, oh my gosh. Elon Musk, oh my gosh. What a guy. What an amazing, crazy genius, right? He's the 4th richest guy in the world now. Tesla is worth more than Toyota, Ford, GM combined. It's totally amazing what's happened with Tesla. Whether that's a bubble or not, it's hard to say, but anyway. So, drive home the point. Kia is not really competing with Ferrari, right? Can you imagine someone saying, I'm thinking about buying a new car. Yeah, I've narrowed it down. I'm either going to get the Ferrari or the Kia. I haven't decided, one or the other. Kia gets a little bit better gas mileage, but the Ferrari, I kind of like the design of the front. No, it's not going to happen, right? Hyundai and Kia are competing against the Apple Cart. And Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche are competing against a second home. or a Rolex watch or some other type of luxury things. These are not purchased for the same reason these are purchased. So they're not really competing with each other, even though technically we would say they're in the same industry. So yeah, strategic group mapping. I'm going to ask you to stop now and take a look at this video called Strategic Group Mapping, and then come back. These are some of the examples of things that are done for strategic group mapping, how we would determine which companies within the same industry would belong to a particular strategic group. All right, we're just about ready to wrap this up. So why is this important? Why is Michael Porter's 5 Forces analysis such a big deal for you? Well, as you're studying strategic management, this can be a very important tool. Think about it. If you are a manager and you know what the industry's forces are, you're going to make better strategic choices. A lot of times consultants, if you take a job as a consulting, working for a consulting company, they might say, hey, start off by doing an industry analysis. Look at these forces. Tell us what's going on here. And then from that, we'll develop some sort of strategy. Because if you know, for example, that your biggest problem, if the biggest force on your industry is the threat of suppliers, then you can go in and try to mitigate that force and increase your profitability. All right, guys. So that's it. Yeah, that's it for that particular topic. Next time we're going to start talking about core competencies. Yeah, that's chapter 3. But in the meantime, hey, this is Michael signing off. Do strategy. Be happy.